Hospital workers, what regrets do you hear from dying patients? I was a hospice nurse. One of my elderly patients had skin cancer. A huge malignant melanoma on the side of his neck that was growing rapidly. He had been a farmer all his life and never married. One night we were talking and I asked him if there was anything he wished he had done differently in his life. And he thought about it a minute and said he wished he had worn a hat when he was farming. I wish he did too. I work in a hospital. Whenever someone is at the end of their life, they always just want to be with their loved ones. Any regrets I've heard is always family related. They wanted more time with the people they love. Most people are at peace with things though. People also tend to wish they took their health seriously. He wished he had been a better father to his daughter. He wished they had reconnected. His dementia prevented him from remembering they had reconnected years before and that she visited often. I wish I could have made him aware that he had accomplished his last wish. But he died not really understanding that. In the it's not something most people see coming when they arrive, but it's usually the same regret when they are coherent. They all wish their family was there, which sucks even more lately with COVID since family can't come in initially. Or they cry out for their so in a panic. It's gotten to the point recently where we tell them so is right here with you. The look of relief on people's faces just hearing that gets me every time. People just want to not be alone at the end. I had a patient who I was in the room with when her doctor explained she only had a few weeks to live. I knew her well. Spent quite a bit of time talking to her up to the news. The days that followed, she seemed to have accepted she was dying. She lived this beautiful, independent, and successful life. Maybe not money successful, but just plain happy. Anyways, when I was helping her to the tub on day 10 since receiving the news, she just broke down crying and couldn't stop crying about how much she wished she didn't put her dog down. See, they could have died together. Come to find out her dog was on his deathbed too. I guess she put her dog down a few days before going into the hospital. She knew her life was over, so she put him down first. She hated herself for it and for the fact she blew the opportunity for them to spend their last moments together. Really heartbreaking to watch. To hear that unfold. She passed early in the morning 2 days later. I took a couple of mental health days off after she passed and spent some time looking up dogs to adopt and new jobs to apply for. My mom did home health and hospice. My stepdad was very abusive and my mom would take me to work with her to try and protect me. She didn't want to leave him due to religious beliefs. That's a different story. There was an old man. I'd play cards with him. We'd talk about working on the farm we had. He was a nice guy. He figured out I was being physically abused. His health started declining and he couldn't play cards or get out of bed. The last time I saw him, he said he was sorry he wasn't younger and that he couldn't help me. Almost 25 years ago, and I still remember him. I remember of this 40-year-old patient that I had was dying from breast cancer that spread throughout her body. She was diagnosed with breast cancer 10 years earlier and had a mastectomy. The doctor recommended for her to have a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction due to high risk of recurrence of cancer. She said that she wanted to keep her breast, a real breast rather than an implant, in case she remarries and will be somewhat whole. She regretted not getting the bilateral mastectomy. If she did, she would not gotten cancer in her remaining breast and dying at such a young age. The patient never ended up marrying after all. A week later, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I instantly told the doctor that I want a bilateral mastectomy with reconstruction. I also had an aggressive form of cancer. My doctor kept pushing a lumpectomy, which I probably would have gotten before I have heard how much she regretted her decision. I feel that she actually saved my life sharing and opening up with her regret of all time. Edit. Thank you all so much. I thought this would just get buried. I pray that the ones facing breast cancer will recover, and my prayers are with you. You are not alone in this. I was 48 years old at the time of my diagnosis and have been cancer-free for the 10 years now. I think of that lady often. She was a mother of 5. She was a true blessing to me. She was my last patient on my last shift prior to getting my results and starting chemo. If it wasn't for her, I know I would not be here. Edit. I had grade 3 HER2 breast cancer. I worked as an oncology nurse right out of nursing school. I was barely 21 years old. Had a patient about my age who was dying of lung cancer. A few hours before he died, I sat with him and he was telling me how much he wished that he would have had more time to maybe fall in love. Marry. Have kids. He was so young. He asked me to call his parents and he died shortly after they arrived. It was awful. His regrets were more about the life not lived. Many older patients had some interesting life stories and most wanted to tell them before they died. Most were at peace with the life they lived. Many regretted working so much and not spending enough time with family. I did training to be a CNA and we had to work in a nursing home as part of our training. I didn't really get into any deep conversations with the patients there. But I can say this. If you have family in a nursing home, please visit with them. It's a sad and lonely place to be. AEMT here. Most patients that I see in my ambulance are too sick to talk in these cases, but one sticks with me. Mid-40s male called us for chest pain, put a 12 lead on, and he was in the middle of a massive heart attack. For those that know the term, he was throwing tombstones. Sad part was he had medical training, so he knew that it wasn't good. We were screaming to the hospital. He looked me dead in the eye and goes, "I should have ate that F. cake." When I asked what he meant, he told me, "F what others think. If it makes you happy, do it. Eat the cake. Pet a squirrel. Take a nap. F anyone else, it doesn't matter." He crashed shortly after we got to Didn't come back. Now at least if I want to do something purely for the fun of it and my wife asks why I want to, all I have to say is I want to pet the squirrel. Edit for more information. Obligatory. Please don't actually pet wild squirrels. They will not be entertained that you are messing with them and put their teeth to work. Tombstones on a EKG are indicative of a massive damage being done to the muscle of the heart due to blockage. And due to electrical signals being seen actually look like tombstones, also known as widowmakers, due to the fatality rate. I couldn't tell him what his EKG said. Due to my level of training, I can only obtain and transmit them, not interpret them. But he asked to see it and knew what he was looking at. Edit 1. Holy smokes, silver and gold, this blew up overnight. Thank you, kind Redditors. I was a new nurse. Flying solo. We got a call for an incoming trauma. Woman in her 50s involved in a multi-car accident. We were already at the ambulance bay. Unsure of the woman's complete condition. She rolled and breathing on her own. But very labored with asymmetrical chest expansion. She was profusely bleeding. Had multiple deep lacerations. Pupils blown. Debris covering most of her. Etc. Her vitals were unstable. She was circling the drain. We knew she was on the verge of coding. I was standing near her head. Ready to assist in supporting her airway, but also providing comfort and doing my best to calm her. The woman looked me directly in the eyes and in a hoarse, labored voice stated, "I was angry." I told her I was disappointed in her. She began to cry. Her vitals plummeted. "I'm sorry," was the last thing she said before her heart stopped. We coded her, intubated her, performed round after round of ACLS, only to eventually have to call time of death. I still see her face at times. Her eyes filled with more emotional pain than physical. It took much longer and was so much harder to write this than I thought it would be. Paramedic, but close enough. Made a run on a woman in her 30s for shortness of breath. Her and her boyfriend had just moved into an apartment together. They were fighting over something trivial. Which room to unpack first or something. He thought she was just being dramatic. We transported. She never made it. Went from awake and talking to unresponsive and asystolic, no cardiac activity, in a matter of seconds. They were so caught up in a little argument that they never said goodbye. They never told each other they loved them. She didn't have any last words. And honestly, that's even worse. I've worked in long-term care for over a decade. I can't speak for the young. But most often old people regret the things they didn't do. A little different, but I worked in a GI lab and we had a much older man, late 70s, probably maybe late 80s. It's been a while. Come in for GI issues. While doing the procedure we found cancer and it was a death sentence. Super bad, and I think he had refused to have a colonoscopy up until this point. The doc said it was horrific, we couldn't get past the cancer, it was so bad. He said maybe a few months. We finish up and I am at bedside with the patient and doc comes in to talk and family wouldn't believe it. The guy wouldn't believe it. The doc backed down and not once told him how bad it actually was. I was pretty upset because doc basically lied to the family and gave them false hope because they wouldn't stop arguing and he just didn't care to tell them the truth. I still wonder often about what happened to him. If he spent his last days fighting it and wearing himself out, or if let himself enjoy his last few months. Colon cancer is horrific. It looks exactly like the word cancer. It's disgusting. It looks alien. Please people get your colonoscopy when you are told. It's not just you are saving, it's your kids who will get screening earlier if they find something in you. But if you don't, they'll never know they are at risk. Edit. I've seen some questions, so here are some recommendations. They changed the recommended age from 50 to 40 a few years ago. That doesn't mean insurance will cover it that early though, but fight for it. Also, if they find precancerous polyps, it'll be a 1 to 3 year follow-up, depending on how many, how bad, etc. If normal polyps, 5 years, and if no polyps, 10 years. If they find something bad like lots of polyps or precancerous, it means your kids' brothers, sisters, etc. get their colonoscopy ASAP. No age rule. I had a mom who got her colonoscopy for issues at age 40-ish and had colon cancer. Her 20-year-old daughter got hers a week or so after that and had colon cancer already as well. Both survived by catching it early. Lastly, the prep is pretty poopy. But no one is looking at your asshole at any time. The doctor will do a digital exam but almost never has to look because it's pretty easy to get into a butthole and you'll already be heavily sedated. The scope goes in and it's done. Most take literally 10 minutes. Legally we have to stay in, I believe, 6 minutes. So go forth and get it done. End of life physician here. CPR. No, seriously, hear me out. Imagine using your hands to crush the sternum down 2 inches repeatedly of your 90-year-old grandmother who weighs 90 pounds. So that maybe you can then put her on a ventilator from which she might never get off alive. We ask this of everyone who comes into the hospital, but too often it's asked more like, hey, if you're drowning, do you want us to save you? Rather than what it truly is, especially for those who most likely won't survive it in the first place, and if they do will be significantly worse off than they were before they died. The survival statistics for patients with 1 to 2 significant comorbidities with an in-hospital cardiac arrest is like less than 5% to leave alive, and then 30-day survival is 5% of that original 5%, if I remember correctly. I cannot count the number of times families were adamant on having it done to their loved one only to then see what it entails firsthand and beg us not to do it again. I used to be a nursing student. I decided to drop out in my 2nd year because it wasn't where my heart was. During my placement at the city hospital, I got to talking to an older man. He must have been like 88 then. 2010. He was talking about how I look exotic and always complimented my long hair, etc., etc. I was never threatened or put off by it. One day he told me I looked like the woman he wished he never let go. That he was completely happy about how his life turned out. Loved his family and late wife. But he always thinks about the woman he shouldn't have let go by. Years later, I met a guy at work who ended up moving across the country for work. I remembered this old man and followed my heart. I never let my love get away. I married him this summer. You should always at least try. Even if it doesn't work out. Go for it and find out so you never wonder. Edit. Wow, thanks for all the responses and the cute award. I wasn't expecting people to react to a cheesy experience like mine. 3 people DM'd me to elaborate on my story with the old man, John David, or JD as I'd called him. Here it goes. JD described this woman and his relationship with her as the perfect little blip in his life. She was a petite Indian woman. I am a petite Pakistani woman, with long black hair and the most amazing smile. They met when he was 18 and she was 16. He was a jock at college and realized that her brother was taking the same classes as him. So he befriended the dorky Indian guy to get to his sister, who worked at the grocery store in town. That's how they met, and it worked. They dated for 6 months before she randomly broke it off. Turned out she was just uncertain about where their relationship would go and could go as an interfaith and racial couple. JD wished he fought harder. Because her brother married a Chinese woman, and if it weren't for his jockey dumb attitude he would gotten over her decision to end things and fought harder for her to understand it would be alright. Decades later, this petite, long-haired girl with an amazing smile, me, comes back into his life and he was flooded with the memories of the love of his life. He said the 6 months they were together were just the most deep and loving and peaceful months of his life. He should have been with her and she was the one who got away. He said back then, you would fall in love in weeks and you loved hard and that was the love of his life. And #X200B. To the people in this thread contemplating asking out their crush. Do it. To the girls out there waiting on the guy to make a move. Do something about it. To the person unhappy with their career choice. Dude, I changed my mind twice. If you put your head down and try. You will always find some solace in that. I worked in long-term care for 12 years. I remember a married couple that shared a room. She had cancer and kidney failure. I was helping her eat lunch one day with her husband sitting there with us. She looked like death, but her husband looked at her, then at me, and said, "Have you ever seen a more beautiful woman?" I had to leave and go to the bathroom and cry. I cried for days every time I thought of what he said. I thought I would never know what it was like to be loved like that. I had been divorced for years. I couldn't even tell the story without tearing up. Footnote: I was divorced 23 years when I met Rod. Been together for 11 years. I know that love now. It's never too late. I had a teenage girl in my psych ward because she had tried to kill herself by overdosing with pills. Was touch and go, but she was revived and admitted. When her parents could come in and see her once she was awake. She was ugly, crying about how sorry she was for taking the pills and how she didn't want to die. Her parents were sobbing and telling her it was okay and they loved her. And then later they all went home and we didn't see them again. And that's the way I need to tell that story to prevent myself from breaking down and not being able to work there anymore. There is nothing in the spoiler below which is worth knowing. For real. Trigger warning for self-harm. I read the coroner's report into her death a few years later. From a later suicide attempt which was successful. They concluded that no combination of interventions or specialists could have prevented this death. Felt like I got physically punched reading that. Still hurts. He was one of my first patients as a nursing student. Named Frank. He was 92. After knowing him a few days, he disclosed to me his regret was outliving everyone he loved. That he and his wife hadn't had kids. And he was all that was left, and that he wanted to see his wife again. I wasn't sure how to respond. So I just listened. And it made me realize how living so long isn't great if everyone you love is gone. He passed away later that week. And while I distinctly recall some of my classmates being upset, I felt relief for him. I knew he was where he wanted to be. I've had many patients since. But you tend to remember your first ones. Other than that, ditto what everyone's saying. More time with family, loved ones. Wish they wasted less time with work or other bullshit. Etc. I've taken care of a lot of COVID patients. Seen a lot die. I had a lady who lived in an adult family home. She was 100% cognitively sound. Her adult family home had a COVID outbreak and she caught it. She spent weeks in the hospital and eventually was put on end-of-life care because she declined. She was kept heavily sedated on a PCA pump to ease her transition. One night, I heard her IV beeping and it was the line occluded alarm. When you work with the dying population on these pumps, you learn the occlusion alarm will sound when the patient dies. This is because there's no blood flow. There I stood, outside her door, listening to the alarm. I sighed and told the nearest CNA to wait by so I could tell him a time of death. I don my PPE and go in and she's still alive. So I restart her pump and stand there a minute, listening to the hum of the HEPA filter. I realized throughout her entire stay at the hospital, she wasn't allowed a single visitor. She's gone through this entire experience alone. I grab a warm washcloth and start wiping around her eyes. The moment the warm cloth touched her skin, she whimpered and leaned into me. Then sighed deeply. She opened one eye and gave me a very quiet, very slurred, "Thanks. Daughter's name. I should have spent more time with you." I left the room and cried for the first time since the pandemic started. She died a few days later. Some people just want you to let them go. I had a man with terminal cancer break down crying after his daughters left the room because they wanted him to keep fighting and he just wanted to rest and pass peacefully. Learn when to let go. Don't know if this will get seen because this blew up and I'll probably delete it in the morning. I worked security in a hospital. In the we had to sit with any 5,150 patients so they wouldn't escape. In CA that's threat to others. Threat to self. Gravely disabled. A legal hold that they can't leave. I had I think a 17-year-old girl that came in on a Tylenol overdose. I normally don't listen or really even get invested with patients because it's usually the same faces on a loop, but she kept trying to strike up a conversation and eventually I relented and she told me how stupid she was and it was over a boy and where she was going to go to college and what she wanted to do and basically her life story. Taking a break to cry for a second. I left and she was stable in the Next day I came in and asked if she went home or if she was in an inpatient unit. They told me she died a few hours after my shift. It's been like 5 years, and thinking about it I start crying like a baby. I don't cry. I think the last time I cried other than this was my grandpa passing, but even that I can discuss without crying now. Her death is the only thing that completely breaks me down. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. If you would like to see more content like this in the future, subscribe and turn on notifications to be notified about future videos. Now check out one of these interesting videos.